The morning was calm in downtown Oklahoma City. People walked into the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building carrying coffee cups, briefcases, and small children on their way to the daycare center. It was April 19, 1995. No one could guess it in just a few minutes. Their lives would change forever. At 9:02 a.m., the ground shook like an earthquake. A deafening blast ripped through the air. Windows shattered across the city. A giant truck bomb exploded right in front of the building. In less than a second, the 9-story structure collapsed into smoke, fire, and twisted steel. Cars were tossed into the air. Walls crumbled. Screams filled the streets. Dust spread like a storm cloud. People miles away felt the blast. Parents who had dropped off their children only minutes earlier ran back, desperate to know if their kids had survived. Sirens screamed from every direction as police, firefighters, and ambulance crews raced to the scene. The Murrah building was gone, turned into a broken skeleton of concrete and wires. Among the rubble were offices, a social security center, the military recruiting office, and a daycare filled with toddlers. Rescuers pulled survivors out, but many never made it. 168 lives were lost that morning, including 19 children. It became the deadliest domestic terror attack in U.S. history. The question burned in everyone's mind: who could do this? The city was frozen in fear, grief, and anger. News cameras showed the haunting image of the building's destroyed face, an open wound in the middle of Oklahoma City. But behind the chaos, investigators were already searching. Somewhere out there, the person who planned this attack was walking free, and the chase to find him was about to begin. Just days before the explosion, a man named Timothy McVeigh was driving across the Midwest in a rented Ryder truck. The back of the truck was not filled with furniture or boxes. It was filled with homemade explosives. He had carefully packed barrels of fertilizer, fuel, and chemicals, enough to destroy an entire building. To him, this was not just an attack. It was a message. McVeigh believed the U.S. government had too much power. He was furious about what happened 2 years earlier in Waco, Texas, where a standoff between federal agents and a religious group ended in fire and death. To McVeigh, this bombing was revenge. But to the innocent people in the Murrah building, it was a normal Wednesday morning. They had no idea a truck bomb was ticking outside. Mothers kissed their children goodbye. Workers greeted each other with smiles. Security guards opened doors, all while McVeigh parked his truck just feet away, set the timer, and walked off without a word. At 9:02 a.m., the timer struck zero. The blast shook the city to its core. Survivors later said it felt like the sky had exploded. One woman remembered falling to the floor as it collapsed beneath her. Another survivor was trapped under concrete, listening to the cries of children that slowly grew silent. As smoke filled the air, first responders ran toward the danger. Firefighters dug through rubble with their bare hands, refusing to stop. A police officer carried out a limp toddler, his face covered in dust, an image that would break the hearts of millions watching on TV. It was chaos, tragedy, and shock all at once. But even as rescue crews worked, FBI agents began looking for the person who had done this. They found pieces of the Ryder truck buried in the rubble. From there, they traced the rental back to a single man, Timothy McVeigh. The nation did not yet know his name, but within hours, the hunt for him had already started. And soon, investigators would learn something even more chilling: that McVeigh had not acted alone. The day after the bombing, the city still shook with grief. Smoke rose from the ruins of the Murrah Federal Building. Families held photos of missing loved ones, begging rescuers for answers. Volunteers lined up with water, blankets, and blood donations. But beneath the heartbreak, the FBI and federal agents were moving fast. They knew every second counted. The first big break came from a single piece of metal found in the rubble, part of the Ryder rental truck that carried the bomb. Investigators traced the vehicle to a rental agency in Junction City, Kansas. The manager remembered the man who rented it. He used the name Robert D. Kling, but the description was unforgettable: short hair, military style, stone-faced. That man was Timothy McVeigh. Here's where luck played a strange role. Just 90 minutes after the bombing, an Oklahoma state trooper, had already pulled McVeigh over for driving without a license plate. The officer noticed he was carrying a gun and arrested him. At that moment, no one knew this man had just bombed a federal building. McVeigh sat in a small-town jail cell while the FBI pieced everything together. By the time agents realized who he was already behind bars. But the story didn't end there. McVeigh hadn't built the bomb alone. He had a partner, Terry Nichols, a former Army buddy who shared his hatred of the government. Together, they had bought fertilizer, diesel fuel, and chemicals to make the deadly mix. Nichols had even helped McVeigh store some supplies in his home in Kansas. When Nichols learned about the bombing, he turned himself in. The FBI knew they had 2 men tied to crime, but they still feared there might be more. Investigators searched for clues everywhere. They questioned family members, friends, and anyone who had seen McVeigh in the days before the blast. They discovered he had stayed in motels, meeting with Nichols and another man, Michael Fortier, who knew about the plot but never warned authorities. The deeper they dug, the clearer it became this was not just the act of one angry man. It was a result of careful planning and cold decisions. Meanwhile, Oklahoma City was living through its darkest days. Funeral after funeral filled the weeks that followed. The image of a firefighter cradling a dying infant, captured by news photographers, became a symbol of the nation's grief. President Bill Clinton visited the city, standing among the ruins, promising that justice would be served. The country was united in sorrow, but also in determination. For McVeigh, there was no sign of regret. In interviews, he spoke calmly, as if the bombing were a mission carried out with purpose. He believed he was striking against what he saw as an unfair government. But to the families who lost children, parents, and friends, his words only deepened the pain. As McVeigh's name hit headlines, the nation's attention turned to how he could have pulled this off. Investigators uncovered receipts, motel records, and even eyewitnesses who had seen McVeigh near the Ryder truck before the explosion. Piece by piece, the FBI built a case strong enough to bring him to trial. Yet even with McVeigh and Nichols in custody, whispers of fear spread across America. Could there be others? Was another attack being planned? The government tightened security at federal buildings across the country. People looked at parked trucks with suspicion. Life in America felt changed forever. The investigation was moving quickly, but the trial was still to come. And when it did, the courtroom would reveal disturbing truths about McVeigh's mind, his plans, and his unshaken belief in what he had done. The trial of Timothy McVeigh began in 1997, 2 years after the bombing. The courtroom was packed with survivors, grieving families, journalists, and government officials. Everyone wanted answers. As McVeigh entered the room, dressed neatly in a suit, the silence was heavy. People stared at the man who had caused so much pain, expecting to see guilt or shame in his eyes. But he showed almost none. He looked calm, almost cold, as if he were proud of what he had done. From the very beginning, the evidence was overwhelming. Prosecutors showed receipts for fertilizer and fuel, motel records, and truck rental agreements. Witnesses described seeing McVeigh near the Ryder truck just before the blast. Survivors told the court about the moment their lives were torn apart, their voices breaking as they recalled loved ones who never came home. Photographs of the destroyed Murrah Building, twisted steel, and shattered glass were shown to the jury. Each image told the story of lives cut short. Yet what shocked many the most were McVeigh's own words. He didn't deny the bombing. In fact, he admitted to it. But he claimed it was an act of war against what he believed was a corrupt government. To him, the deaths of 168 people, including 19 innocent children, were collateral damage. His cold justification horrified everyone listening. The jury didn't take long. After only 23 hours of deliberation, they found Timothy McVeigh guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced him to death. In that moment, a wave of emotion swept through the courtroom. Some families cried tears of relief. Others felt no joy, only emptiness, because nothing could bring their loved ones back. But McVeigh's story did not end with the trial. For the next 4 years, he sat on death row at a federal prison in Terre Haute, Indiana. Reporters continued to ask him for interviews. Some said he showed no regret. Others said he seemed to enjoy the attention. While families tried to heal, McVeigh remained calm, waiting for the day of his execution. On June 11, 2001, that day came. It was the first federal execution in the United States in nearly 40 years. Outside the prison, crowds of protesters and supporters gathered. Some demanded justice. Others argued against the death penalty. Inside, the victims' families were allowed to watch the execution on closed-circuit television. At 7:14 a.m., Timothy McVeigh was led into the execution chamber. He chose not to speak any final words. He only gave a short written statement, a poem called Invictus, which spoke about being the master of his fate. Minutes later, as lethal injection entered his veins, his chest rose and fell one last time. At 7:14 a.m., he was pronounced dead. The Oklahoma City bombing had left scars that would never fully heal. The loss of so many innocent lives, especially children, left the city forever changed. Yet the people of Oklahoma City refused to let hatred define them. A memorial was built on the site of the Murrah Building. 168 empty chairs, each one representing a life lost. Smaller chairs stand for the children, reminding everyone of what was stolen that morning. A reflecting pool runs quietly through the center, offering peace where once there was only chaos. For the survivors and families, justice had been served, but true closure was harder to find. Some felt relief at McVeigh's execution. Others still wrestled with grief, asking why such evil had touched their lives. The bombing changed America too. Security at federal buildings was tightened. New anti-terrorism laws were passed. And for years, people looked at parked trucks near public buildings with fear. It was a reminder that even in the heart of the country, danger could strike without warning. The Oklahoma City bombing remains the deadliest act of domestic terrorism in U.S. history, a tragedy that proved how one man's hatred could destroy so many lives, but also how a community could rise from the ashes with courage, strength, and remembrance.